Welcome back to Kohelet. We are up to chapter 1, verse 4. As usual, I'll start with the Hebrew. Dor holech v'dor ba, v'ha'aretz le'olam omadet, which means a generation goes and a generation comes, and the land always stands. So there are, so on the surface level, this obviously just means that, generations come and go, but the earth just lasts forever. But we know that to be true. Okay, we don't need Ecclesiastes to tell us that. So there's going to be symbolism and there's going to be moral. And then I'm going to do a little extrapolation for nowadays. There was a cute story in the rabbinic literature that says that there were two men that were arguing over a piece of property, and the property, as if to say, called out to them, you guys can argue as much as you want, but one day I'm going to own both of you. Meaning what many of us toil away much of our lives for, which kind of goes back to verse 3, right? What is the benefit? What is the profit that person enjoys from all his toil under the sun, right? So if we're kind of piggybacking on that message, people generation after generation toils to make monetary, this worldly, earthly gains. But in the end, there's something beyond the shemesh, like under the sun, beyond the sun, and something that is beyond this earth, right? So it's a perspective back to that existential stuff. Okay, there's another symbolism that the word aretz, earth, means low. So Rashi says, that's a commentary, says that who are the ones that really end up making leaving their long-term mark on the earth? It's the ones who are humble, the ones who are lowly, the ones who don't feel the need to amass tremendous wealth or fame, but the people who really do want to make a difference. And there are other places where the righteous are referred to as earth. The word aretz, earth, is connected to the word arutz, which means to run. The earth is a place where people are constantly running. People are constantly chasing goals. In this earth, in this lifetime, there's this kind of franticness. There's this energy that people need to chase. And then when we kind of get to the end of our lives, or we go into the eternal world, it's a whole different existence. Another thing that I want to point out about this concept of generations coming and going is that, and he's going to talk about Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, Shlomo is going to talk more about this in future chapters and verses, is the idea that there is an evolution of humanity over the course of generations. And that sometimes when you read something in the Talmud, in the Gemara, and it describes a reality of the human condition or a sociological observation or something about gender or something, they'll make a comment that doesn't necessarily hold true for humanity and for our experiences the way we know them to be, whether it's scientific or psychological or just, phenomenological. And that's because there's such a thing called nishtanu hatzava'im, which means that nature changes, right? The earth changes and people change and human nature changes. And I think that's also something that contemporary society is really struggling with. When we look back on history and people who are put on pedestals as having been heroic or making some kind of valuable contribution to society, to humanity, to a particular country or group or ethnicity. And when people look back with sort of a more critical, analytic eye, they start to see the flaws and the faults. And what they need to keep in perspective is that the norms and the beliefs and the morals of different times really called for different standards. And to be able to have the nuance and say that there are evolutions that take place over the course of human history that are sometimes an improvement, and in some ways are the opposite. But that it's not helpful to judge other generations by our generation's norms and standards and wavelengths, and vice versa. To be able to glean and take messages and lessons from in a way that is productive and constructive and useful to us, to take the good and say, okay, so we've learned things from the past that, we wouldn't do that nowadays, but there are certain contributions that have been made by other generations. And likewise, in our generation, we can look around and say, I agree with and appreciate some of the progress that has been made by contemporary Western society. And I value and appreciate some of that, and some of it doesn't jive with my own values and beliefs and morals. And this is tricky stuff, but I think this is part of what Ecclesiastes is saying. Generations are always evolving and changing, and there are certain, earth realities that are just always there.